Hi everyone, now you are watching my channel. All the content I create myself, new videos every day, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Thanks, bye!
A billionaire's wife was dying in childbirth. 12 world-class doctors had tried everything for 41 hours. Nothing worked. The baby was stuck, and time was running out. Then a 52-year-old cleaning lady holding a mop did something that made every doctor in that room freeze. She knocked on the delivery room door and said 5 words that should have gotten her arrested. "I can save your baby." She had no medical degree, no license, just hands that had delivered babies in a village most Americans couldn't find on a map. Tension for 17 years, Marisol had mopped these floors in silence. But her grandmother had taught her secrets that Harvard Medical School never learned. Techniques passed down through 7 generations that could turn a baby without surgery. The billionaire nearly threw her out. His wife was minutes from emergency surgery that could kill her.
Leave here now!
Why would anyone trust a janitor over 12 Ivy League doctors?
This is unacceptable!
Wait, give her a chance.
What? Why?
But Cassandra Whitfield looked into Marisol's eyes and saw something the expensive specialists didn't have. Certainty. "Let her try," Cassandra whispered. Marisol had 5 minutes. If she failed, she'd lose everything. Her job, maybe her freedom. If she succeeded, she'd prove that the woman everyone ignored knew more than the experts everyone trusted. She placed her calloused, cleaning chemical-worn hands on that billionaire's wife's belly. And what happened in the next 10 minutes would either make her a hero or destroy her completely. The baby's heart rate was dropping. The doctors were preparing the operating room. And Marisol started doing something none of them had ever seen before. Stay with me, because what happens next will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about who deserves to be heard. 3 hours earlier, Marisol was just the custodian. Invisible. Ignored. Holding a mop instead of delivering babies. But she was listening, and what she heard through that delivery room door made her blood run cold. She'd been listening through that door for the past 3 hours. Not because she was nosy, but because something in her bones told her to pay attention. She'd heard the doctors cycling through their protocols, heard the increasingly desperate tone in their voices, heard Cassandra's screams turning from powerful to weak, from determined to defeated. And Marisol knew, with the certainty that came from delivering 14 babies in her village before she was 20 years old, exactly what was wrong. The baby was posterior, face up instead of face down, stuck against the mother's spine in a position that no amount of American medical technology could fix, but that Marisol's grandmother could have corrected in 10 minutes with nothing but skilled hands and ancient knowledge passed down through 7 generations of midwives. Marisol looked at the door, then at the security guard making his rounds, then at her reflection in the polished hospital floor. She thought about what would happen if she was wrong. She'd lose her job, definitely, probably get deported, might even face criminal charges for practicing medicine without a license. Then she thought about what would happen if she was right and did nothing. A baby would die, maybe the mother, too, and Marisol would carry that weight for whatever years she had left. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "When you know how to help, Mija, staying silent is the same as doing harm." Marisol set down her mop, smoothed her faded scrubs, and knocked on the delivery room door. What would you risk to save 2 lives when the world says you're nobody qualified to try? Marisol had learned to be invisible long before she crossed the border. It was a survival skill she developed as a child in a village so poor that sometimes being noticed meant being a target. When you grow up in a place where resources are scarce and desperation runs deep, you learn quickly that the safest way to exist is to take up as little space as possible. To move through the world like smoke, to breathe like a secret, to become so utterly forgettable that powerful people never have to be reminded that you need things they don't want to share. She'd come to New York 17 years ago with nothing but $200 sewn into the lining of her coat and the address of a cousin who'd promised her a place to sleep. That cousin had moved 2 months before Marisol arrived, leaving no forwarding information, and Marisol had spent her first week in America sleeping in a church basement, eating donated bread, and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The job at Manhattan Memorial had been a miracle, or at least that's what the employment agency called it. Night shift custodian, minimum wage, no benefits, but it was legal work with a real paycheck, and after 6 months they'd even helped her get a work permit. Marisol had been grateful. So grateful that she'd never complained about the bathrooms she scrubbed, the vomit she mopped up, the way doctors and nurses looked through her like she was made of glass. But Marisol carried something those doctors didn't have. She carried the knowledge of 7 generations of Salvadoran midwives, women who'd brought babies into the world with nothing but their hands and their wisdom and their absolute refusal to let mothers die when there was something they could do about it. Her grandmother, Abuela Luz, had been the village's primary birth attendant for 40 years. She'd delivered over 600 babies, lost only 3, and those losses had haunted her until the day she died. If you're already invested in Marisol's story, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single moment of this incredible journey. Abuela Luz had started teaching Marisol when she was just 8 years old. Not because Marisol had asked, but because Luz had looked at her granddaughter one morning and announced, "You have the hands. I can see it. The knowing is in your fingers." Marisol hadn't understood what that meant until her first birth. When she was 12 and her neighbor went into labor at 2 o'clock in the morning, and there was no time to get to the clinic in the next town. Luz had brought Marisol with her, positioned her small hands on the laboring woman's belly, and taught her to feel things that couldn't be seen. The position of the baby, the strength of the contractions, the moment when intervention was needed, and the moment when the only thing required was patience. By the time Marisol was 16, she was attending births on her own. By 18, she'd developed a reputation. Women would request her specifically, would walk for hours just so Marisol could be the one to catch their babies. She'd delivered twins in a rainstorm with nothing but a kerosene lamp for light. She'd turned a breech baby with techniques her grandmother had learned from her grandmother, gentle manipulations that convinced the child to flip without surgery. She'd saved a mother who was hemorrhaging by using herbs and pressure points that American doctors would have dismissed as superstition. And then the violence had come to her village. The gangs that controlled the region had started recruiting young men, killing the ones who refused. Marisol's nephew had been murdered for saying no. Her brother had disappeared. Her sister-in-law had been threatened. And Marisol had made the hardest choice of her life. She'd left behind everything she knew, everyone she loved, and the sacred calling that had defined her existence, to come to a country where her knowledge meant nothing and her experience counted for less than 0. For 17 years, she'd been a custodian. For 17 years, she'd mopped floors and emptied trash and scrubbed toilets, while doctors who didn't know half of what she knew about birth walked past her without a glance. She'd made peace with it, or told herself she had. This was the price of safety, of survival, of sending money home so her family could eat. But tonight, standing outside that delivery room door, listening to a woman scream and doctors argue and equipment blare warnings, Marisol felt something crack open inside her chest. The part of her that had been a midwife, a healer, a woman who understood birth the way a musician understands a symphony, that part refused to stay silent anymore. This story is about to take a turn that will leave you breathless. Make sure you're subscribed so you can follow every twist and turn. Hit that subscribe button now. The Whitfield baby had been the talk of the hospital for months. Preston Whitfield was one of those tech billionaires whose name appeared in headlines with words like visionary and disruptor and genius. He'd built a social media empire from his dorm room, sold it for $18 billion, and used that money to launch a dozen other companies that were collectively worth more than some small countries. His wife, Cassandra, was a former fashion model turned philanthropist, the kind of woman who appeared in Vogue wearing couture to charity galas. They lived in a penthouse that had been featured in Architectural Digest, vacationed on a private island, and moved through the world with the absolute certainty that money could solve any problem. The pregnancy had been difficult from the start. Cassandra was 43, considered advanced maternal age in obstetric terms, and this was their first biological child after years of fertility treatments. They'd hired the best doctors, followed every protocol, spared no expense. The nursery in their penthouse had been designed by a celebrity interior designer and stocked with organic, handcrafted furniture that cost more than Marisol's annual salary. When Cassandra went into labor 2 days ago, Preston had arranged for her to deliver in the hospital's luxury birthing suite, a space that looked more like a five-star hotel than a medical facility. He'd assembled a dream team of obstetricians, each one a specialist in some aspect of high-risk delivery. Dr. Catherine Ashford from Yale, Dr. James Morrison from Johns Hopkins, Dr. Priya Chatterjee from Columbia, Dr. Robert Fletcher from Stanford. 12 doctors total, each one carrying degrees and credentials and reputations that had taken decades to build. And for 41 hours, those 12 doctors had been losing the battle. Marisol had been cleaning the hallway outside the suite when the first crisis hit around hour 30. She'd heard the sudden rush of voices, the urgent beeping of monitors, the sound of running feet. A nurse had burst through the door, nearly knocking over Marisol's cleaning cart, shouting for an anesthesiologist. Marisol had pressed herself against the wall, invisible as always, and watched the chaos unfold. Over the next 11 hours, she'd pieced together what was happening through overheard conversations and the increasingly desperate expressions on the faces of medical staff coming and going. The baby was stuck. Every time Cassandra pushed, the baby's heart rate dropped dangerously low. The doctors had tried everything: position changes, manual manipulation, medications to strengthen contractions, medications to relax the cervix. Nothing worked. Now they were discussing a C-section, but there were complications. Cassandra's blood pressure was dangerously high. She'd already lost more blood than was safe. Her body was so exhausted from the prolonged labor that surgery carried serious risks. The anesthesiologist was concerned about her cardiac function. The surgical team was debating whether to use general anesthesia or try to keep her conscious. Marisol had listened to all of this and known, with the bone-deep certainty that came from catching hundreds of babies, exactly what the problem was. She'd heard it in the description of the baby's position, in the pattern of the heart rate decelerations, in the way the doctors described Cassandra's pain in her back radiating down her legs. Posterior presentation. The baby was face up, spine against the mother's spine, trying to navigate through the pelvis at an angle that made descent nearly impossible. It was a common problem, one that Abuela Luz had taught Marisol to fix when she was 13 years old. You don't fight the baby, Luz had explained. You dance with it. You find the rhythm of the contractions, you feel where the baby's shoulders are, and you guide it. Gentle, gentle, like convincing a flower to open. Force will make things worse. Patience and skilled hands will make things right. The doctors inside that room were operating from textbooks and protocols. They were looking at numbers on screens, measurements from ultrasounds, data from monitors. But they couldn't feel what Marisol would have felt if she'd been allowed to put her hands on Cassandra's belly. They couldn't sense the exact position of the baby's body, couldn't feel the subtle shifts that indicated when the baby was ready to turn, couldn't communicate with their hands what their machines were missing. And the baby was running out of time. Marisol knocked on the delivery room door. It was a tentative knock, not the confident rap of someone who belonged there, but the hesitant tap of someone who knew they were crossing a line they weren't supposed to cross. The door opened a crack. A nurse appeared, her face exhausted and stressed. "What? I'm sorry to bother you," Marisol said in her careful English, the accent she'd never quite been able to smooth out, making her words precise and measured. "But I hear the baby is stuck. I might can help." The nurse blinked. "You're the custodian." "Yes, but in my country I was a midwife. I delivered many babies, many difficult births. I think I know what is wrong." The nurse's expression shifted from exhausted to annoyed. "Ma'am, we have 12 of the best obstetricians in the country in there. If they can't figure it out, I don't think." "The baby is posterior," Marisol interrupted. She knew she was being bold, knew she was risking everything, but the memory of her grandmother's voice was louder than her fear. "Face up, yes? The head is pressing on the mother's spine. This is why she has so much pain in her back. This is why the baby cannot come down." The nurse started to close the door. "Thank you for your concern, but I can turn the baby," Marisol said urgently. "With my hands from outside. No surgery needed. 10, maybe 15 minutes. I have done this many times. Ma'am, you need to step back and let us do our jobs." The door closed in Marisol's face. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the smooth wood, feeling the weight of her insignificance press down on her shoulders. Of course, they hadn't listened. Why would they? She was nobody, custodian, an immigrant with an accent and faded scrubs. Her knowledge didn't come with a diploma from an Ivy League university. Her experience hadn't been validated by the American medical system. She was invisible, and invisible people don't get to save lives. Marisol picked up her mop and started to walk away. She tried. She'd spoken up. That was more than she usually did. She could go back to being invisible now, go back to cleaning floors and staying silent and accepting her place in the world. Then she heard it. Through the closed door, she heard Cassandra Whitfield scream. Not the productive screams of active labor, but the desperate, terrified screams of a woman who'd been pushed past her limits. And under those screams, she heard Dr. Ashford's voice, tight with controlled panic. "We're losing fetal heart tones. We need to move to emergency C-section now." Marisol stopped walking. What happens in the next 60 seconds will change everything. If you're not subscribed, you're about to miss the most intense moment of this entire story. Subscribe now. Marisol turned around and knocked on the door again. Harder this time, louder, the kind of knock that demanded attention. The same nurse opened the door, her face now genuinely angry. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to call security if you don't." "Let me try," Marisol said, and her voice was different now. Not hesitant, not apologetic. It was the voice of a woman who delivered 14 babies before she was 20, who'd saved mothers and children with nothing but her hands and her knowledge and her absolute conviction that she knew what she was doing. 5 minutes. That is all I ask. If I cannot help, then do your surgery. But if I can save this mother from being cut open, if I can save this baby from the risks of surgery, is 5 minutes not worth it? The nurse was about to refuse. Marisol could see it in her face. But then Dr. Ashford appeared behind her, and something in the doctor's expression made Marisol's heart jump. It wasn't anger. It was desperation. "What did she say?" Dr. Ashford asked. "She thinks the baby is posterior and she can turn it manually," the nurse said, her tone making it clear what she thought of that idea. Dr. Ashford looked at Marisol for a long moment. "You're the custodian." "Yes, but in El Salvador I was a midwife. I delivered many babies, many difficult presentations." "Do you have any medical credentials? Any formal training?" "I trained with my grandmother for 10 years. She delivered over 600 babies. I delivered more than 100 myself before I came to America." Dr. Ashford's jaw tightened. Marisol could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. On one hand, this was absurd. You don't let a custodian with no American medical credentials touch a patient, especially not a billionaire's wife in the middle of a complicated delivery. On the other hand, they were out of options. The C-section carried serious risks. And there was something in this woman's eyes, something calm and certain and utterly confident, that spoke to a part of Dr. Ashford that still remembered why she'd become a doctor in the first place. "Dr. Ashford," the nurse said, "you can't be seriously considering. How would you do it?" Dr. Ashford interrupted, her eyes still on Marisol. "I put my hands on the mother's belly," Marisol explained. "I feel where the baby's head is, where the shoulders are. Between contractions, when the uterus is soft, I apply gentle pressure to guide the baby to rotate. It does not hurt. The mother will feel my hands, but it is not painful. If the baby is ready to turn, it will turn. If not, I will know in 5 minutes and you can do your surgery." "And if something goes wrong?" Dr. Ashford asked. "Nothing will go wrong," Marisol said simply. "I have done this many, many times. I know what I am doing." There was a commotion behind Dr. Ashford. Preston Whitfield appeared, his designer suit rumpled, his face haggard. "What's going on? Why are we standing here talking? My wife needs surgery now." Dr. Ashford turned to him. "Mr. Whitfield, this woman believes she can turn your baby without surgery." Preston stared at Marisol like she'd just appeared out of thin air. "Who is she?" "I'm a custodian here," Marisol said. "But I used to be a midwife." "A custodian." Preston's voice dripped with disbelief. You want my wife treated by a custodian when we have 12 of the best doctors in the country here? Sir, Dr. Ashford said carefully, the surgery carries significant risks given your wife's current condition. If there's a chance to avoid it. No, Preston said flatly. Absolutely not. We're doing the surgery. I don't care about the risks. I want actual doctors treating my wife, not some. He stopped himself, but everyone knew what word he'd almost said. Marisol felt the familiar weight of invisibility settling back over her shoulders. She'd tried. She'd spoken up. She'd offered her knowledge. And like always, it wasn't enough. The rich man had spoken, and the rich man's word was final. Then another voice cut through the tension. Weak, hoarse, but determined. Let her try. Everyone turned. Cassandra Whitfield was partially visible through the doorway. Propped up on pillows, her face pale and drawn, her hair matted with sweat. But her eyes were clear and focused on Marisol. Cassandra, you don't understand. Preston started. I understand that I've been in labor for almost 2 days. Cassandra interrupted. I understand that every intervention these doctors have tried has failed. I understand that surgery right now could kill me. And I understand that this woman looks me in the eye like she actually knows what she's talking about. She focused on Marisol. You really think you can turn my baby? Yes, Marisol said. I am certain. Then do it, Cassandra said. Please, I want to try. This is it. The moment everything changes. Marisol is about to do something that will either make her a hero or destroy her life completely. The delivery room fell silent. Preston looked at his wife, at the doctors, at Marisol, and then back at his wife. For a moment, Marisol thought he would refuse, would use his wealth and power to override even his wife's wishes. Then something shifted in his face. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the first time in his life he'd encountered a problem that his money couldn't immediately solve. 5 minutes, he said finally. You get 5 minutes. If it doesn't work, we go straight to surgery. Dr. Ashford nodded. Agreed. She looked at Marisol. You can try, but I'll be monitoring everything. If I see anything concerning, we stop immediately. Marisol entered the delivery room. It was enormous, more like a luxury hotel suite than a medical space. There was a birthing tub in one corner, a massage chair, mood lighting that could be adjusted for different stages of labor. The medical equipment was state-of-the-art, machines that could monitor every possible metric of maternal and fetal health. And in the center of all this expensive technology was Cassandra Whitfield, a woman in pain, a mother trying desperately to bring her baby into the world. Marisol approached the bed slowly, her hands already sensing what they would need to do. She could see the shape of Cassandra's belly, could read the position of the baby in the way the abdomen was carrying, slightly lopsided, with a hard spot on the left side that indicated where the baby's back was. I am going to put my hands on you now, Marisol said gently in her accented English. I will not hurt you. I am just feeling where your baby is. Cassandra nodded, too exhausted to speak. Marisol placed her hands on Cassandra's belly. Her hands were rough from 17 years of cleaning, calloused and work-worn. Nothing like the smooth, gloved hands of the doctors who'd been examining Cassandra. But the moment her palms made contact with Cassandra's skin, something happened. Marisol's grandmother had called it the knowing. That instant connection between midwife and mother, between skilled hands and laboring body, when information flowed both ways and you could sense things that no monitor could measure. She felt the baby immediately. Head down, that was good, but rotated wrong, facing forward instead of facing the mother's spine. She felt the shoulders, the curve of the spine, the position of the limbs. She felt the way the baby was wedged against the pelvis, unable to move down because the angle was all wrong. And she felt something else. The baby was tired but not in distress. The baby was waiting, had been waiting for someone to help, someone to understand. Babies know things, Abuela Luz used to say. They know when the people around them are fighting with their bodies instead of working with them. Sometimes you just have to show the baby the way. Okay, Marisol said softly, speaking as much to the baby as to the mother. I understand. We are going to fix this now. A contraction started. Marisol kept her hands still, feeling the wave of tension move through Cassandra's uterus, feeling the baby respond to the pressure. She waited, patient, until the contraction ended and Cassandra's belly went soft again. Then she began. Marisol's hands moved with practiced confidence. She found the baby's shoulder through the abdominal wall, applied gentle, steady pressure upward and to the right. Not forcing, not pushing hard, just suggesting, guiding, having a conversation with the baby through touch and pressure and that mysterious knowing that connected midwife to child. "Come on, little one," she murmured in Spanish. "Just a little turn, that's all. Just show me you can move." The 12 doctors crowded around, watching with expressions that ranged from skeptical to curious to openly hostile. Dr. Morrison, the Johns Hopkins specialist, was practically vibrating with disapproval. But Dr. Ashford was watching Marisol's hands with intense focus, and Marisol could tell the woman was actually seeing what she was doing, actually understanding the technique. Another contraction came. Marisol kept her hands steady, maintaining gentle pressure, working with the contraction instead of against it. She felt the baby shift slightly, felt the head rotate a few degrees. Progress. Small but real. "It's working," Cassandra gasped. "I can feel it. The pain in my back. It's less." "That's because the baby is moving away from your spine," Marisol explained, keeping her voice calm and reassuring. "We are making space. Just breathe through this contraction." "Good. Very good." The contraction ended. Marisol adjusted her hand position, found a new leverage point. This time, she applied pressure in a slightly different direction, encouraging the baby to continue the rotation. She could feel the baby responding now, could feel the small body turning in the cramped space of the pelvis. "The baby's heart rate is improving," one of the nurses monitoring the fetal monitor announced. "Coming back up to 140. Fetal position is changing on ultrasound," another voice said. "The baby's rotating." Preston Whitfield moved closer, his face a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "Is it really working?" "Yes," Marisol said simply. "Your baby is turning. Just a little more now." She worked in silence, her hands reading signals that none of the expensive equipment in the room could detect. She felt the moment when the baby's head slipped past a tight spot in the pelvis, felt the shoulders realign, felt the entire body shift into the correct position, face down now, chin tucked, ready to descend. "There," Marisol said, pulling her hands back. "It is done. The baby is in the right position now. Next contraction, you push and this baby will come." Dr. Ashford quickly did an internal examination. Her eyes went wide. Full dilation. Baby's head is at +2 station. Presentation is now occiput anterior. She looked up at Marisol with something like awe. "You did it. You actually did it." Contraction hit. This one was different. Cassandra's body, which had been fighting for 41 hours, suddenly knew exactly what to do. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a surge of primal power. "Push," Dr. Ashford commanded. "Push now." Cassandra pushed, and this time the baby descended. Moved down through the birth canal the way babies are supposed to move when everything is aligned correctly. Another push, another foot of progress. The room erupted in controlled excitement, doctors and nurses positioning themselves, preparing to catch this baby that they'd all thought would need to be surgically removed. "I can see the head," Dr. Ashford called out. "One more push, Cassandra. One more and your baby's here." Cassandra screamed and pushed with everything she had left. And then suddenly, impossibly, after 42 hours of labor, after 12 doctors had run out of options, after a billionaire had nearly lost everything that mattered, a baby slid into Dr. Ashford's waiting hands. The cry was immediate, loud, indignant, perfect. "It's a boy," Dr. Ashford said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have a healthy baby boy." The baby was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, good color, strong cry. Dr. Ashford placed him on Cassandra's chest, and the room full of people who'd witnessed the impossible erupted in cheers and tears and relieved laughter. Preston collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands, sobbing. Cassandra was crying too, holding her son, kissing his vernix-covered head. whispering words of love and relief and gratitude. And Marisol stood at the edge of the room, her worn hands at her sides, tears streaming down her face. She'd done it. After 17 years of being invisible, 17 years of cleaning floors while carrying the knowledge of generations, 17 years of silence, she'd finally used her gift again. She'd saved a mother and child. She'd been a midwife again. Dr. Ashford walked over to her. The doctor's eyes were red, her professional composure shattered by what she'd just witnessed. "That was extraordinary," she said quietly. "I've been practicing obstetrics for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like that. Where did you learn to do that?" "My grandmother," Marisol said. "She taught me that babies are not problems to solve. They are people to guide. Sometimes the old ways work better than all the new machines. You won't believe what happens next." This story is far from over, and the aftermath of Marisol's miracle is going to change lives in ways no one expected. Stay subscribed. The delivery room had transformed from a place of crisis to a place of jubilation. The baby, whom Preston and Cassandra named Maxwell, was healthy and nursing within an hour. Cassandra had required only minor stitches, her body recovering remarkably quickly once the prolonged labor finally ended. The 12 doctors who'd been unable to solve the problem stood in small groups, some discussing what they'd witnessed, others openly studying their shoes in embarrassment. Dr. Morrison, the Johns Hopkins specialist, was the first to leave. He muttered something about catching a flight and disappeared without another word. But Dr. Ashford stayed. So did Dr. Chatterjee and several others. They watched Marisol with new eyes now, seeing her for the first time as something other than the invisible woman who cleaned their floors. Marisol had tried to slip away quietly. She'd done what needed to be done, and now she wanted to return to her familiar invisibility before anyone decided she'd overstepped too badly. But as she picked up her abandoned cleaning cart from the hallway, Dr. Ashford came after her. "Wait," the doctor called. "Please don't go yet." Marisol turned, her heart hammering. This was it. This was when she'd be told she was fired, possibly facing legal consequences for practicing medicine without a license. But Dr. Ashford's face wasn't angry. "I need to ask you something. How many times have you done that? The manual rotation technique." "Many times," Marisol said carefully. "In my village, posterior babies were common. We did not have surgery, so we learned to turn them." "And your success rate?" "I never lost a baby because of wrong position. Sometimes they could not turn, and then we would make the mother work harder, change positions many times, but always the baby came. Always." Dr. Ashford shook her head slowly. "Do you realize what you have? The knowledge you carry? That technique you just used is mentioned in some older obstetric texts, but it's considered outdated. Most modern obstetricians don't even learn it anymore. We go straight to C-section for persistent posterior presentations. But what you did in there," her voice caught, "you made it look easy. You knew exactly where to put your hands, exactly how much pressure to use, exactly when to push and when to wait. That's not luck. That's skill. That's mastery." Marisol didn't know what to say. For 17 years, she'd been told in 1,000 unspoken ways that her knowledge was worthless, that her experience didn't count, that she needed to stay in her place and let the real professionals handle the important work. And now, this doctor, this highly educated, prestigious American physician, was looking at her with something like reverence. "I learned from the best teacher," Marisol said finally. "My grandmother was a great midwife. She taught me to listen to the baby, to feel what is happening, not just look at machines." "Would you?" Dr. Ashford hesitated, then pushed forward. "Would you be willing to teach others? What you did tonight, it's not just about this one baby. There are thousands of women who end up with unnecessary C-sections because of posterior presentations. If we could learn your technique, if we could teach it to other doctors, we could reduce surgical complications, reduce recovery times, reduce costs, reduce trauma. You could change obstetric care." Before Marisol could respond, Preston Whitfield appeared in the hallway. He'd cleaned up, changed into fresh clothes, but his eyes were still red from crying. He walked straight to Marisol and did something that shocked everyone watching. He knelt down in front of her. This billionaire, worth $18 billion, wearing a suit that cost more than Marisol's car, dropped to his knees in a hospital hallway and looked up at the custodian who'd saved his family. "I don't know how to thank you," Preston said, his voice breaking. "I almost lost them both tonight. My wife, my son, everything that matters. And you saved them when nobody else could. You saved them, and I was ready to throw you out of the room. I was ready to call you nobody." "Please stand up, sir," Marisol said, deeply uncomfortable. "I was only doing what I know how to do." "No," Preston said firmly, but he did stand. "You weren't only doing anything. You did something extraordinary. You have a gift and He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent my whole life believing that the best knowledge, the most valuable expertise, comes from the places I expected. The best universities, the most prestigious institutions, the people with the right credentials. And I was wrong. I was so wrong." He pulled out his phone. "What's your full name?" "Marisol. Marisol Vasquez." Preston typed something. Then he showed her the screen. It was a bank transfer to her account for $100,000. Marisol's knees nearly gave out. "Sir, I cannot. This is too much. I was just—" "That's not payment," Preston interrupted. "That's just to start. To say thank you. To make sure you're okay while we figure out what comes next." He looked at Dr. Ashford. "I want to fund a program, a birthing center, maybe, somewhere that combines traditional knowledge with modern medicine. Somewhere that values wisdom no matter where it comes from. And I want you—" He looked back at Marisol. "To be part of it. To teach, to practice, to share what you know." "I'm not a licensed doctor," Marisol said. "I cannot practice medicine in America." "Then we'll figure out how to change that," Preston said. "Or we'll create a role that doesn't require a license. Consulting midwife, cultural birth specialist. I don't care what we call it. What I care about is making sure that what you know doesn't disappear when you—" He stopped, recalibrated. "What I'm trying to say is that tonight, you showed me something I'd forgotten. That knowledge comes from lots of places. That expertise isn't always stamped with official approval. That sometimes the person who can solve your problem is the person you've been trained not to see. The aftermath of one miracle is about to create another one. Marisol's life is about to change in ways she never imagined. But the journey isn't easy. The news of what happened in that delivery room spread through Manhattan Memorial Hospital like wildfire. By the next morning, every staff member knew the story. The custodian who'd delivered the Whitfield baby after 12 doctors failed. Some versions of the story were accurate. Many were exaggerated. But all of them positioned Marisol as either a hero or a reckless amateur who'd gotten lucky. The hospital administration was not pleased. Legal was definitely not pleased. They convened an emergency meeting to discuss potential liability, potential lawsuits, potential disasters that could have occurred. The fact that everything had worked out perfectly didn't matter to the lawyers. What mattered was that a non-credentialed employee had performed a medical intervention without authorization. Marisol was called to the administrator's office at the end of her shift. She went expecting to be fired, possibly arrested. She'd spent the entire night rehearsing what she would say, how she would explain, whether she should just accept her punishment in silence or try to defend herself. But when she walked into the conference room, she found not just administrators, but Dr. Ashford, Dr. Chatterjee, Preston Whitfield, and a team of lawyers who turned out to be his, not the hospital's. "Ms. Vasquez," the hospital administrator began. His name was Richard Sterling, and he looked like he hadn't slept. "What happened last night was highly irregular." "Yes, sir," Marisol said quietly. "I know. I am sorry if I caused problems." "Sorry," Preston Whitfield interrupted. "She saved my wife and child, and she's apologizing?" "Mr. Whitfield," Sterling said carefully, "we appreciate what Ms. Vasquez did, but there are protocols, procedures, liability issues." "Then change the protocols," Preston said flatly. "I'm prepared to make a significant donation to this hospital. Let's say $10 million to start. But it comes with conditions. 1. Ms. Vasquez keeps her job, no questions asked. 2, you create a formal position for traditional birth attendants to work alongside your obstetricians. 3, you develop a training program so your doctors can learn from people like Ms. Vasquez instead of dismissing their knowledge. The room fell silent. $10 million was more than the hospital's entire obstetrics department budget for a year. Sterling cleared his throat. Mr. Whitfield, we would need to consult with the medical board. I've already spoken to my lawyers, Preston interrupted. They tell me there are plenty of legal frameworks for integrating traditional practitioners into hospital settings. Doulas, lactation consultants, cultural birth workers. We just need to create the right structure. He looked at Marisol. What do you want? If you could design your ideal role here, what would it look like? Marisol hadn't expected the question. She'd spent so long being told what her place was that being asked what she wanted felt like speaking a foreign language. She started, then stopped, then tried again. I want to help mothers. I want to teach doctors the old ways that work. I want to make sure that women who have hard births, they get the help they need, all kinds of help, not just surgery. She took a breath. I want my grandmother's knowledge to matter. I want it to be respected. Dr. Ashford leaned forward. What if we created a pilot program? Traditional Birth Wisdom Integration Initiative or something like that. Ms. Vasquez works with our high-risk obstetrics team, not as a doctor, but as a consultant. She teaches us her techniques. We document what works, we study the outcomes, we create a model that other hospitals could adopt. Would you need to be in the delivery room for that? Sterling asked nervously. Sometimes, Dr. Ashford said, under my supervision with my medical license on the line. I take full responsibility. But yes, sometimes traditional techniques require hands-on demonstration. I'm not sure the medical board, Preston said icily, will do whatever is necessary to avoid the headline. Hospital fires woman who saved billionaire's baby. I can make sure that headline runs in every major paper in the country if that's what it takes. He wasn't smiling. He meant every word. Sterling looked at Marisol, at the billionaire, at his own legal team. The calculation was obvious. Fight this and face a public relations nightmare plus lose a major donation. Or find a way to make it work. Let me consult with our board, Sterling said finally. We'll need to structure this carefully, but... He looked at Marisol, and for the first time, she saw respect in his eyes. I think we can find a way. Marisol's quiet revolution is just beginning. The fight to validate traditional knowledge in a modern medical system isn't going to be easy, but what happens next will inspire you. Stay subscribed. The next 6 months transformed Marisol's life in ways she'd never imagined. Preston Whitfield's donation went through, and with it came the creation of the Traditional Birth Wisdom Center, housed in a newly renovated wing of Manhattan Memorial Hospital. The center was designed to be a bridge between ancient practices and modern medicine, a place where doctors could learn from traditional birth attendants and where laboring women could choose the kind of care that felt right to them. Marisol became the center's first cultural birth specialist, a title that had been invented specifically for her. Her official role was to consult on difficult deliveries, to teach traditional techniques to medical students and residents, and to provide culturally informed care to the hospital's diverse patient population. The doctors' reactions varied. Some, like Dr. Ashford, embraced the program enthusiastically. They attended Marisol's workshops, watched her demonstrate techniques, asked hundreds of questions about the physiological basis for traditional practices. Others were skeptical or openly hostile, viewing Marisol as a threat to evidence-based medicine, a return to dangerous, unscientific practices. The first time Marisol taught a workshop to a room full of obstetricians and medical students, her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the demonstration doll. She'd delivered over 100 babies in her village, but standing in front of people with medical degrees, trying to explain techniques that had been passed down through oral tradition, felt impossible. The key, she'd begun in her careful English, is to feel what is happening inside. The machines, they tell you numbers, but the hands, they tell you the story. She demonstrated on the doll, showing how to palpate for position, how to apply pressure during and between contractions, how to sense when a baby was ready to turn and when more time was needed. One young resident had raised his hand. But how do you know when to push and when to wait? What's the physiological marker you're feeling for? Marisol had struggled to find the words. It is not one thing. It is many things together. The hardness of the muscle, the direction of the movement, the response when you press. My grandmother called it listening with your fingers. You must practice many times to understand. So it's intuition, another doctor had said, his tone dismissive. Subjective interpretation. No, Dr. Ashford had interjected. It's tactile assessment using proprioceptive feedback. This pattern recognition developed through extensive experience. Just because we haven't quantified it with monitors doesn't mean it's not real. The human hand can detect pressure changes and position shifts that our ultrasounds miss. The workshop had continued, sometimes tense, sometimes illuminating. By the end, several doctors had asked Marisol if they could observe her working with actual patients. A few had thanked her for sharing knowledge they'd never encountered in medical school. And slowly, word spread. Women started requesting Marisol specifically. Women who'd had traumatic previous births. Women from immigrant communities who felt more comfortable with someone who understood their cultural practices. Women who simply wanted an alternative to the highly medicalized births they'd experienced before. Marisol worked under Dr. Ashford's supervision, always careful to stay within legal boundaries, always deferring to the doctor's final authority. But her success rate was undeniable. Over those 6 months, she consulted on 34 difficult deliveries. 31 of them ended with spontaneous vaginal births that the doctors had been preparing to do surgically. The other 3 did require C-sections, but Marisol had been the one to recognize when traditional techniques weren't working and surgery was necessary. The data was compelling enough that the hospital's medical board officially approved the program. Other hospitals started calling, asking about the model, wanting to create similar initiatives. Medical journals requested articles about the integration of traditional and modern obstetric practices. One evening, about 8 months after the night that changed everything, Marisol was leaving the hospital when she saw a familiar figure in the parking lot. Preston Whitfield was getting out of his car, and he had Maxwell with him. The baby, now 8 months old, was chubby and healthy, with his mother's eyes and his father's determined expression. Marisol, Preston called out. I was hoping I'd run into you. We're here for Maxwell's checkup, and Cassandra wanted me to give you something. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a letter. Dear Marisol, the letter read in Cassandra's elegant handwriting. Every day I hold my son. I think about you. I think about how close I came to losing him, and how you refused to let that happen. This money is a small thank you, but more importantly, I want you to know that you changed more than just our lives that night. You changed how I think about wisdom, about knowledge, about who gets to be an expert. I've started a foundation to support traditional birth workers, to fund training programs, to preserve indigenous medical knowledge. I'm calling it the Abuela Luz Foundation after your grandmother. I hope that's okay. Thank you for saving my family. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up when everyone else had given up. Thank you for showing us that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who see most clearly. With eternal gratitude, Cassandra. Marisol's eyes blurred with tears. She looked at baby Maxwell, this perfect child who shouldn't have survived, and felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy settling onto her shoulders. Not as a burden, but as wings. Your grandmother would be proud, Preston said quietly. You honored her knowledge. You made it matter. She always told me, Marisol said, that birth is sacred work, that bringing babies into the world is the most important thing humans do. She said midwives are the keepers of that sacred knowledge, and we must never let it die. It won't, Preston assured her. Not now. Not with people like you teaching it to the next generation. Maxwell reached out his chubby hand toward Marisol. She took it, felt his strong grip, and smiled through her tears. Hola, Maxwell, she whispered. Do you know you are a miracle? Do you know your life started a revolution? Marisol's story doesn't end here. It's really just beginning. 2 years after that night in the delivery room, Marisol stood on a stage at Columbia University's medical school. She was wearing professional clothes now, though she still felt more comfortable in her old scrubs. The auditorium was packed with medical students, doctors, midwives, and traditional birth attendants from around the country. They'd come for a symposium on integrating traditional and modern obstetric practice, and Marisol was the keynote speaker. She'd never imagined herself here, a poor immigrant from El Salvador, addressing some of the country's most prestigious medical professionals. But Dr. Ashford had insisted, and Preston Whitfield's foundation had sponsored the event, and Cassandra's Abuela Lou's foundation had worked to bring traditional practitioners from around the world to share their knowledge. Marisol stepped up to the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, and took a deep breath. "My name is Marisol Vasquez," she began. "2 years ago, I was a custodian. I mopped floors and cleaned bathrooms and was invisible to most of the people in this hospital. But I carried something that nobody saw. I carried the knowledge of 7 generations of midwives, taught to me by my grandmother Luz Vasquez, who delivered over 600 babies with nothing but her hands and her wisdom and her love." She paused, gathering her courage. "For 17 years, I stayed silent. I watched women suffer in birth, watched doctors struggle with complications that I knew how to fix, and I said nothing, because I believed that my knowledge did not matter, that I was nobody, that people like me should stay invisible and let the experts handle the important work. Then one night, I heard a woman screaming. I heard a baby dying, and I had to choose, stay invisible and safe, or speak up and risk everything. I chose to speak up, and that choice changed my life, but more importantly, it started a conversation. A conversation about whose knowledge matters, about where expertise comes from, about the wisdom we lose when we decide that only certain people with certain credentials from certain places get to be experts. Marisol's voice grew stronger. "The knowledge my grandmother taught me is not superstition. It is science, learned through generations of careful observation, passed down through oral tradition because our people did not have access to books and schools. It is real, it is valuable, and it saves lives. But it is not the only knowledge that matters. Modern medicine saves lives, too. Technology and research and evidence-based practice are powerful tools. The question is not which knowledge is better. The question is, how do we bring them together? How do we create a healthcare system that values all forms of expertise? How do we make sure that the next time a woman is struggling in labor, we have every tool available, traditional and modern, to help her?" She looked at Dr. Ashford, sitting in the front row. "I was blessed to work with doctors who were willing to learn, who were humble enough to admit they didn't know everything, who were brave enough to try a different way. But not every traditional practitioner is that lucky. All over this country, all over the world, there are women like my grandmother, carrying knowledge that could save lives, and nobody is listening to them. This symposium is a start. The programs we are building are a start. But it is only a start. We need more hospitals willing to open their doors. We need more doctors willing to learn. We need more respect for traditional knowledge, more funding for programs that preserve it, more recognition that wisdom comes from many sources." Marisol's eyes swept the audience. "My grandmother used to say that birth belongs to women, not to doctors, not to hospitals, not to any institution. Birth belongs to the mother and the baby and the sacred mystery of bringing new life into the world. Our job as birth workers, whether we are doctors or midwives or traditional attendants, is to serve that sacred process, to support it, to protect it, to interfere only when necessary, and to respect all the knowledge that helps us do that well. 2 years ago, I was a custodian. Today, I am a cultural birth specialist. I teach doctors techniques my grandmother taught me. I consult on difficult deliveries. I help mothers have the births they want, the births that feel right to them, whether that means all the technology or none of it or something in between. But I am still Marisol. I am still the daughter of immigrants. I am still a woman who grew up poor in El Salvador. And I am still carrying my grandmother's knowledge. The difference is now people are listening." She smiled. "My grandmother used to say, when you know how to help, Mija, staying silent is the same as doing harm. I stayed silent for 17 years. I will not be silent anymore. And I hope that after this symposium, after hearing from all the amazing practitioners who are here today, None of you will be silent either. Speak up for traditional knowledge. Value it. Learn from it. Integrate it into your practice. Honor the grandmothers and the midwives and the healers who figured out how to catch babies and save mothers long before medical schools existed. Because every time we dismiss traditional knowledge, we lose something precious. And every time we listen, every time we learn, every time we build bridges between different forms of expertise, we gain something powerful. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And thank you for caring about birth, about mothers, about babies, and about preserving the wisdom that keeps them safe. The auditorium erupted in applause. People stood, some crying, some cheering. Marisol stood at the podium, no longer invisible, no longer silent, carrying her grandmother's legacy forward into a future where traditional knowledge and modern medicine walked side by side. 3 years after that night in the delivery room, the Abuela Luz Foundation had funded 47 traditional birth worker training programs across the United States. The traditional birth wisdom center model had been adopted by 23 hospitals. Medical schools were beginning to include modules on traditional obstetric practices in their curricula. And Marisol had trained 89 doctors in the manual rotation techniques that had saved Maxwell Whitfield's life. She still worked at Manhattan Memorial, though she made more in a week now than she used to make in a year. She'd brought her sister and 2 nieces to New York from El Salvador. She'd bought a small house in Queens. She'd established a scholarship fund for young women from her village who wanted to train as midwives. But her favorite part of her work was still the simplest: being in the delivery room, putting her hands on a laboring mother's belly, feeling the baby move, whispering encouragement in Spanish or English or whatever language the mother understood, catching babies, the way her grandmother had taught her, with reverence and joy and that sacred knowing that passed from one pair of hands to the next. One afternoon, Marisol was leaving the hospital when a young woman approached her. She looked about 25 with kind eyes and nervous energy. "Are you Marisol Vasquez?" the woman asked. "Yes, I am. I'm starting medical school next month. At Columbia, I'm going to specialize in obstetrics. And she paused, gathering courage. "I just wanted to say thank you. I read about what you did, about how you saved that baby when the doctors couldn't. And it made me realize that I want to be the kind of doctor who listens, who learns, who respects all forms of knowledge. Because of you, I'm going to medical school to become a bridge between the old ways and the new ways. So, thank you." Marisol felt tears prickle her eyes. This was what she'd hoped for. Not just to save one baby, but to change how an entire generation of doctors thought about birth, about knowledge, about who gets to be an expert. "What is your name?" Marisol asked. "Luz," the young woman said. "My name is Luz. My grandmother named me. She was a midwife in Mexico." Marisol smiled through her tears. "Then you carry a sacred name. Luz means light. Your grandmother knew what she was doing when she gave you that name. She was telling you to be a light for others. I hope I can be," Luz said, "the way you were." "You will be," Marisol assured her. "And when you graduate, when you become a doctor, come find me. I will teach you everything my grandmother taught me, and you will teach the next generation. That is how knowledge stays alive. We pass it forward, one pair of hands to the next, one light to the next." The young woman hugged her, thanked her again, and walked away. Marisol watched her go. This Luz who would carry light into the medical world, who would honor the old ways while embracing the new, who proved that Marisol's grandmother's knowledge would not die with her. She looked up at the evening sky over New York City, the same sky her grandmother had looked up at in El Salvador, the same stars that had witnessed 7 generations of births and deaths and the endless cycle of life. "I did it, Abuela," Marisol whispered. "I kept the knowledge alive. I made it matter." Somewhere, in whatever place grandmothers go when they leave this world, Marisol believed that Abuela Luz was smiling. Thank you for following Marisol's incredible journey from invisible custodian to respected healer. If the story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about whose knowledge deserves to be honored, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Remember, you are not invisible. Your background is not a limitation. It's a foundation. And the knowledge you carry, the wisdom your family gave you, the perspective that comes from your unique experience, the world needs all of it. Until next time, stay blessed, stay bold, and never stop believing that one person can change everything. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this one. And leave a comment telling us, what wisdom did your grandmother teach you that the world needs to hear?